It didn't begin with machetes. It began with words. A radio station. Propaganda. Centuries-old tensions whispered in classrooms and shouted on airwaves. And when the killing started, neighbors turned on neighbors. But what made this possible? What led Rwanda, once a peaceful nation, to one of the most horrifying genocides in modern history? To understand the genocide of 1994, we need to rewind over a century. In the late 19th century, Rwanda was a kingdom, small, hilly, and heavily centralized. The people were primarily divided into three groups: the Hutu, the Tutsi, and the TWA. These weren't rigid ethnic groups. In fact, they shared the same language, culture, and even intermarried. But everything changed with colonialism. When Germany, and later Belgium, colonized Rwanda, they implemented a policy of divide and rule. The Belgians believed the Tutsi were racially superior, more European in appearance. So, they favored Tutsis for education, leadership, and authority. In 1933, Belgium introduced ethnic identity cards, formally labeling every Rwandan as Hutu, Tutsi, or TWA. That single policy would plant the seed of disaster. The Belgians deepened the social divide, creating resentment among the Hutu majority, who were systematically excluded from power. By the late 1950s, winds of independence swept across Africa. And in Rwanda, it took the form of a Hutu uprising. In 1959, the Hutu Revolution began. Tutsi chiefs were overthrown, and thousands of Tutsis were killed or fled into exile. The monarchy was abolished, and in 1962, Rwanda gained independence, with a Hutu-led government. But this was not peace. It was merely a shift in dominance. The new government treated Tutsis as enemies of the state. Pogroms followed. Tutsis were periodically attacked and forced into exile, especially in Uganda, Burundi, and Congo. Over time, these exiled Tutsis began to organize. In 1987, Rwandan exiles formed the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, in Uganda, most notably led by Paul Kagame and Fred Rwigema. Their aim? Return home and reclaim their rights. In 1990, the RPF invaded northern Rwanda, triggering a civil war. The Rwandan government, led by President Juvenal Habyarimana, framed this as a Tutsi attempt to retake the country by force. Internally, this invasion gave birth to a wave of fear and nationalism. To many Hutus, the RPF wasn't just an army, it was a threat to Hutu power. And behind the scenes, something even more terrifying was brewing. The early 1990s saw the birth of hate radio, particularly Radio Television Libre de Mille Collines, RTLM. They didn't hide their message. They called Tutsis cockroaches. They joked about their elimination. Day after day, year after year, the seeds of genocide were being sown, not with weapons, but with words. Extremist groups like the Interahamwe, a paramilitary youth wing, began organizing and stockpiling weapons. Lists of Tutsi families were quietly compiled. Training camps were set up. The state prepared for something unspoken, but very real. Meanwhile, international pressure pushed Rwanda into peace talks. In 1993, the Arusha Accords were signed, a deal that would see the RPF join the government. But hardline Hutu extremists weren't ready to share power. They saw the accords as a betrayal. President Habyarimana was caught in the middle, trying to balance peace with the radicals in his own government. That balance would shatter in one horrifying moment. On April 6, 1994, President Habyarimana's plane was shot down as it approached Kigali. To this day, it's unclear who was responsible. Some blame the RPF. Others believe it was Hutu extremists, who used it as the final excuse to launch their deadly plan. Within hours, roadblocks were set up. Tutsi families were hunted down. Moderate Hutus who opposed the genocide were also killed. The order had been given. The genocide had begun. From April to July 1994, 800,000 to 1 million people were murdered, many hacked to death with machetes. Neighbors turned on neighbors. Teachers killed students. Priests betrayed congregants. The UN and international community largely stood by. Despite being present, UN peacekeepers were ordered not to intervene. The world watched in silence. Inside Rwanda, the government encouraged the killings. Local leaders handed out hit lists. Victims were hunted systematically. The RPF, meanwhile, resumed its military offensive, moving south from Uganda to stop the slaughter and take back the country. In July 1994, they succeeded. Kigali fell. The genocidal government fled. The killing stopped, but the scars remained. The genocide left Rwanda shattered. The country was a graveyard. Millions were displaced. Families were erased. The international community faced intense criticism for failing to act. In 1998, U.S. President Bill Clinton visited Rwanda and expressed regret. The UN admitted failure. But the truth remained, nothing could undo what had happened. Rwanda, under Paul Kagame, began rebuilding. Reconciliation courts called Gacaca were set up. A new national identity was forged, one that no longer identified Hutu or Tutsi. What led to the Rwandan genocide wasn't one moment. It was decades of division, colonial manipulation, political fear, and unchecked hate speech. It's a chilling reminder, genocide doesn't begin with killing, it begins with silence, with us versus them, with words that dehumanize. Rwanda is a story of horror, but also a story of warning. History doesn't just repeat. It waits for us to ignore it. This was not a tribal war. This was a politically orchestrated extermination. And understanding how it happened is the first step to making sure it never happens again.